Hello, welcome to We the Poets. Mark Grist here, one of the hosts. We're really, really fortunate in this episode to get Jess Green joining us, and we have a fantastic conversation. Just as a trigger warning, there will be discussions about suicide and sexual assault within this episode.
Yay! Charley's back. Charley's returned.
Charley's back.
But hello.
But their microphone is haunted by Tony Nero.
It is.
Because it keeps moving.
Keeps moving.
Yeah, Tony don't want you to have
Tony
that
banged
spot.
that mic stand
A few times.
a few times, as you said. But it was so great having me along last episode.
It was. But we missed you.
We did miss
you.
Yeah. But it was a great episode. Tony did a banging job.
He did, yeah. He was incredible.
He can paint a kingfisher at
So,
any time,
memory.
any place from memory.
It makes me very happy, but equally, I have rage. Jealous rage.
Hello, everybody listening right now. Thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Mark Grist.
I'm Keely Mills.
I'm Charley Genever.
And we are three Peterborough-based poets, producers, promoters, just...
Barrow boys.
We do whatever needs to be
Jumble
done.
sale curators.
I'm not that good at improv. I can't think of a profession.
Cheese grater experts.
Dog whisperers.
Yeah.
And we set up this podcast a while ago to get us a bit of inspiration and to kind of get us enthused by writing and performing again, and it's been amazing so far, hasn't it?
It's
so
happening,
cool.
Isn't it? I feel like we have been inspired. I'm really excited about today's guest as well, because I've never met Jess before.
Oh.
So I'm really excited.
First time.
Yeah.
You've met Jess.
I have met Jess and obviously been really inspired by her work and think she's a brilliant writer. So I'm really excited to deep dive into particularly her transition, moving from poetry into TV and film. That's something I know nothing about. So I'm super excited.
Absolutely. So Jess has been quite a major figure within spoken word in the UK, but she made this move into TV. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to talk about that journey, because it seems like a lot. In my head, I don't even know where to begin with how to make that move.
But it also proves that what we've always felt with this, poets have the ability, as much as any artist, to move into other genres if they want to. So I think that's really exciting to learn a bit more about.
Yeah.
For me as well, I've always admired just how authentically political Jess's work is. And I really want to kind of find out what that's been like for her. Thinking about being authentic and sharing your true voice and having the confidence to do that, and to do that in a really uncensored, authentic way, but then being mindful of the backlash or how that might be perceived.
And still get your bills paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've known Jess for a while, and it's so nice to see her, because we were at Edinburgh at the same time, and I remember she was doing her show then. And she entered the Edinburgh Fringe Slam, the BBC Slam. It's a huge competition with multiple rounds and the big final event. I remember she was, practicing and prepping for that, all while she was losing her voice. And I just remember thinking how tough she was, because I can't put myself up for slams. I can't handle that.
Really?
The idea of being rejected like that. I just
No, I thought I was the worst. I thought I was the worst out of the three of us, because you've done battle, rap battling. I mean, that is
I couldn't put myself under that spot. I found it too stressful.
I can't keep to the 3-minute rule and all of that jazz. I'm a riffer.
Riz with the riffer.
How did you guess my OnlyFans name?
well, before Jess comes in, let's have a listen to a poem that's been sent into the inbox. This is a poem by Sarah Waits. She attended one of our workshops on the series, overseen by Leanne Moden. She sent this piece through. This is Sarah Waits with a poem called Counting.
I've forgotten the options from which I'm told to choose, and there's always a high volume of calls. You'll record my angry words for training and quality purposes. I recognise the threat beneath the smarm. I'll try not to crack, go mad and swear at agents. I know they're not to blame. Doesn't my time count too? I'm counting seconds, minutes now, while listening to the endless loop of tinny tunes. I do not wish to go online. I've come this far. I'll grit it out to hear a human take my call, hoping it's the right human, the right call. I count my anger on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm nearing 9. I count to 10, to pause, to breathe. Counting, there are too few of you to answer calls. Why are there never enough? Enough of doctors, nurses, beds and time. It will be hours before you're seen. Why does it take so long? We're wilting on the abacus of endless waits, counting out hours, lives. Why does no one do the human sum, the cost in pain? Count the people who should go elsewhere, the wounded, sick, abandoned, scared, and count all those who do not dare to come. Count the minutes, hours, days, all sliding by. Count the numbers on the poor old NHS's waiting list.
Thank you so much, Sarah Waits, for that fantastic piece. We really enjoyed listening to it. Now, we're really excited because we've got our special guest here. We've got Jess Green in the studio. Woo! Hey, Jess, how you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
You've listened to the series?
Yeah, I've listened to all of them. It's like my go-to listening for the gym.
Who's your favourite host?
I couldn't possibly say. I love you all equally.
But you are nearer to Charley.
Yeah,
so fair
it's
enough.
Charley.
Thank you. I can tell you dyed your hair especially.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, well, we're so pleased to have you here. If you don't know Jess's work at all, Jess is a great writer for theatre, for TV, but also, we kind of first knew Jess's work through the spoken word poetry circuit. She had a piece called Dear Mr. Gove, which went like hugely viral. It was a long piece. Back in the day, the idea that you could go viral for a piece that, I think that poem over 5 minutes long?
Yeah, it's nearly 6 minutes long. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now people's attention, we don't have pieces going viral in the same way things trend, but it's like a 60-second, 90-second piece. But yeah, that was the first time certainly that I became aware of Jess's work in like a big way. But also I got to see you at Edinburgh. We were both up there doing an Edinburgh run on the free fringe, and my show was okay, like it was doing okay, but Jess's show was rammed like every single day. We were like marshalling people in and out. The show was a self-help guide to being in love with Jeremy Corbyn, and I was very fortunate to get to see it twice. There was a great energy around it, but at the same time, you won the BBC Fringe Slam Championship that year when you were up, and it felt like you had like just a dream run essentially at the Fringe. And it was around about that time you kind of moved out of poetry like as a central thing and moved into kind of writing for TV and everything else.
But I think also that process was just reminding myself that actually I am still a poet. I think that as a writer who writes for like TV, theatre, film, podcasts, poetry, there are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many days of the week. And I would love to do all of those things full time, but that's not possible. And also not all of those things pay my bills. And so it's making that choice all the time about what you give your energy to and being able to, pay your bills as well.
Can I ask you a question about Edinburgh? For you going through that run, with winning the Slam, it was definitely the most popular show in the venue by quite a bit. It was people were really excited and enthused by the show. What were your memories of that Edinburgh run as the person who was going through it?
I mean, so it was the first time that I had done a full run, and that was so exciting and so daunting. It taught me so much about performing and producing, and I do really think that, without wanting to be terribly dramatic, I do think that Edinburgh was quite kind of career changing for me. In terms of the confidence it gave me, I think it dramatically improved my performance skills. I went into that run performing one way, and I came out performing completely differently to the first week of Edinburgh. I had horrific laryngitis. I mean, I couldn't speak. I had completely lost my voice. I had to cancel 2 shows in a row, which is just, just a complete no-no at the Fringe. And I went into my first heat and I just about got my voice back, and I managed to get through that heat. And then, by the time we got to the final, I'd been performing every single day to all kinds of people. And I knew what I was getting myself into, giving a show a name like A Self-Help Guide to Being in Love with Jeremy Corbyn. It is eye-catching, it's provocative. I think it's important to remember that 2018 was a very different time politically to where we are now. I think if you tried to put a show like that on now, no one would come, or people would come and just heckle you. And we did get some heckling in 2018, and we did get some stag groups. And it was such a test to manage all of that. And it can be sink or swim, the Fringe. And I felt my confidence building every single day. And so then we got to that final of the BBC Slam, which is in that great big tent. It's filmed for television.
Yeah,
it's
huge.
Absolutely rammed. And I'm competing against people like Nafisa Hamid, Jasmine Gardozzi, Ben Norris had won it the year before. It felt like such a big deal. And the other thing that was utterly terrifying was that my poems that I was going to do in the final were all too long. And I only realised that on the day. So I had to edit them that morning. And we had a conversation about it. And I said, what do I do? How do I get these poems into my head? I was performing poems in the final that were different versions of the poems than I had been performing all month. And my goodness, it was terrifying. But, I couldn't have won that final if that final had been in the first week of Edinburgh. It was the process of all of that got me to a point where I was just so confident on stage. I went into a tour. I toured the Corbyn show. I mean, I toured it for about on and off for a year. I mean, truly like the rise of Corbyn and the fall of Corbyn. My last performance of the Corbyn show was the week before the infamous 2019 general election. And I was doing quite a lot of like Labour Party and trade union gigs. I was constantly gigging. And my confidence was really carrying me. And during all of this, I'd applied to the BBC Writers Academy, which is a training programme which takes people from other arts industries, so like poetry, theatre, and trains them up to write for television. And I managed to get through all of these different rounds, interviews, workshops, more interviews. When I got onto the course, so I don't know how many thousands of people apply, and there's 8 of us who made it onto the course. And I got in the room and I was like, I am the least experienced person here. And I realised, this is not me being humble. It was the confidence that had got me through. I had gone into every single room, interview, workshop, and just bounced in there with just this confidence because I'd had an amazing year.
Yeah.
And it really taught me something about the power, the absolute glow of confidence. And it made me realise that's how like white straight guys move through their entire life. They just bounce in thinking, I can do this. And they convince everyone that they can do it. It gave me a real insight into that.
I feel very seen. Yeah. I've got away with a lot of mediocrity in my tone.
So yeah, I wanted to kind of ask you, like, as you talk a lot about your confidence with such a political piece of work, how you really balance, I guess, your authentic opinion through creativity and making a living out of it as well. Yeah, how you find you kind of, either, I guess, hold on to that confidence and that authenticity, but then how you deal with any kind of criticisms of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because probably now, when we hear about a show called A Self-Help Guide to Being in Love with Jeremy Corbyn, we have very different perceptions of what that is compared to when I took it to Edinburgh in 2018 or when I was writing it in 2017. When I started writing it, I was so naive about the way it would be received. You know, I've been a Labour Party member since I was 16. My parents were big Labour Party activists. I was out door knocking in the pram when I was little. You know, it's really in my veins. And so when I started writing this, I was like, you know, filled with so much like, hope for our political future. You know, it was the first time that I had lived under a Tory government. When the Tories got in 2010, that was the first time in my life that we'd had a Tory coalition government. And, you know, I could just see the damage that they were doing to the country. And when Corbyn got in, it was just after like the disaster of Ed Miliband. And Corbyn was just saying all this stuff that like I completely agreed with. And I know that we are now in a place where he's made some mistakes, he's mishandled some things, and I agree with a lot of the criticisms against him. But back then, it just all felt so hopeful, and I just started writing from a place of hope. You know, I was so interested in the way that, you know, I grew up at a time when there was a lot of kind of political apathy. You know, I was the only person in the Labour Student Society in my university. Young people in school weren't really politically excited. And to see the way that this like old man, this like septuagenarian was like inspiring young people to get interested in politics, I do think that the Corbyn effect, we are still seeing the consequences now. And that, I think that is why a lot of young people are so politicised now. I think it's had a sort of trickle down effect. So I wrote it from a place of excitement and, you know, started performing it, and was just performing it to other people who loved Corbyn and were really hopeful, and it was getting all of this like positive response. And I'll be honest, it was when we got to Edinburgh, and it was in the first few days, and Mark said to me, oh yeah, there were some guys in the bar like making a comment about like it's a cult when they saw your flyer. And I was like, oh really? And it was the first time that I was like, I had an understanding of how I was perceived by people who completely didn't agree with me. The title was always tongue-in-cheek. The title was always meant to be provocative.
You puncture your own naivety within the show. You kind of like, you riff off of it, you know, like in some ways. You kind of go, he's not Father Christmas, right? You kind of play out these different things. You don't take yourself 100% seriously in the context of the show. No,
not at all. No, not at all. I think I wasn't ready. The thing about, you know, that first mention of like, it's a cult was the first moment that I was like, oh, there's actually some quite serious vitriol here. And, you know, and I'm putting myself up that year, 2018, as this like figurehead for the Corbyn Club. And it was the first moment that I thought, okay, this might be a bit difficult. And then, you know what, like we did have stag do's in and some of my proudest achievements on stage have been kind of, you know, dealing with that. And generally, you know, it was good. And, you know, and we came out the end of that and it was really positive. I think what was interesting was that after Edinburgh and winning the Slam, and I was doing a lot of gigs for the Labour Party, and I think it was in autumn 2018, it was a Labour Party conference, and I was performing in Liverpool, and I performed at this Labour Party event. There were lots of speakers, there were some comedians. I got up and did a few poems from the show. Went really well, came off stage, John McDonnell shook my hand. I was like, this is great, this is nice, having a nice time. Off to the bar. And this guy just stopped me and he was like, oh, is there any chance, absolutely loved your set, is there any chance that I could just film that poem you did? And I was like, yeah, sure. And like, what a lesson in naivety. And so he filmed me doing this poem. And the poem is a sort of tongue-in-cheek poem at the end of the show. It's a list poem and it's like, Jeremy Corbyn will fix my bike, Jeremy Corbyn will pay off my student loan. It goes on and on and on. And in the context of the show, it's really fun and it's silly and it gets laughs.
Yeah.
But this journalist, who turned out to be an ITV journalist, filmed it and put it online. And I am like, red-faced, I've just come off stage, I'm sweaty, and I'm just doing this poem, think nothing of it. He shakes my hand, thanks, see you later, and I go off to the bar. And then it goes online a couple of days later, and I am just ripped apart. You know, he knew what he was doing. He put that online to be like, look at this idiot, look at this member of the Jeremy Corbyn cult. And I was ripped apart for like a week. And it had such an impact on my mental health. It made me feel suicidal. It made me feel like I should never have done the show, that everyone just thought I was an idiot, that no one got it. And yeah, it was awful. It was really upsetting.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, because people did get it. Like, as someone who was there in the show, that piece, it's not even about Jeremy Corbyn. And like, it's beautiful, but it's funny as well. It's about all these other things, but you can't get the nuances
Absolutely.
without the setup.
But
Yeah.
have you because I think it's a fear, isn't it? Sometimes when I'm writing something, I worry about like, what is the vitriol, or what is the comeback I'm going to get from having this view?
Yeah.
But do you have that fear anymore, or or are you able to? Because you've been through that is so extreme.
Yeah.
Must
Are
be a
you
lot.
able to be like, no, this is because I think we need art to do that. I hope you've still not got that fear and that you're able to.
No. Oh, goodness, no. I mean, no, now I'm definitely in a place where, you know, it's like writing something that you absolutely love and you're really proud of, and then 3 years later you come back to it and you find it a bit cringe.
Yeah.
But it's something that was it made sense in the moment. And I'm a really big believer of, like, you know, believing your feelings. You know, at the time I was so proud of that show and loads of people came to see it, and in fact it was that Corbyn List poem that won the slam.
Oh wow.
So what I ended up doing with this experience is that we got some Arts Council funding to take the Corbyn show on tour in 2019, and I changed the ending to incorporate this story of what this ITV journalist had done to me into it, because I really have a feeling, you know, of just like owning that experience, taking control of that narrative. I'm always thinking, like, what would you say to your younger self? What would you say to your teenage self? And I would never want a young artist, writer to feel fear about writing about the things that they believe in. You know, it's really important. So no, certainly, you know, it was a pretty bruising experience, and it taught me a lot of lessons about not believing journalists and not letting your mouth run away with you on something like a podcast. But certainly, no, I loved that show and I love that poem, and I'm incredibly proud of what I achieved with it.
It's great to hear that, like, that sense of own, and I relate a lot to like the owning experience, and like you say, trying to take control again. Do you find that you're still writing as much about politics, or have you kind of shifted into other areas as well?
I mean, goodness, I was writing about politics from like 2010 when we had our first Tory coalition government, right up to 2019. Doing that Corbyn show 1 week before the 2019 general election. I remember after that having a moment of being like, I mean, this sounds deeply naive, but like, oh, it's not working. My show didn't get us a Labour government. Not that I ever thought that it would, but, you know, I had this real moment of like, what's the fucking point? Like, what is the point of writing about this stuff? I would like to clarify, I think it is extremely important that we write about politics and we write about things that we believe in. And I think it's really important that we use the arts to hold power to account. So actually, over the past 5 years, I have moved much more into my own personal experience. And what it was being on the BBC Writers Academy, which is a year-long course which trains people to write for television, and the training ground is the soaps, so EastEnders, Casualty, Holby City. And during that time, they also support you to develop your own ideas. And at first, you know, I got the soaps, I could understand script writing, and you know, I love EastEnders and all of that. Yeah, it is cool. But like, I was struggling with developing my own ideas, and I kept sort of trying to tell these political stories, and they weren't really working. And John York, who's the brilliant guy who runs the course, said to me, but what are your stories? What are your personal stories? And the truth is that at that time in 2019, when I was doing this course, I was also going through a police investigation against 2 men who abused me when I was a child. And that was this like massive secret that I had held my entire life. And I had only very recently spoken up about it, in the sense of like telling my husband, going to the police, telling people that are in my close networks. And so the idea of like writing a script about that was just terrifying. But I decided to take a risk and begin to tap into some of these themes. And actually, it's been really good, I think, in terms of my creative process, to feel a lot more vulnerable, to explore what I am comfortable writing about. And in that, then deciding, okay, then what is for public consumption and what is for me. And also that has had an impact on the work that I do directly outside of my writing. So I do a lot of work now with young people, young girls and women who've experienced sexual violence, particularly through rape crisis. And it led me to write my new collection, which is called Dressed as Love, which is had its origins in writing about my experience of abuse and the justice system, but also abuses of power, which, you know, we have seen so much with our Tory government. And actually it made me realise, you know, this theme of abuses of power has been the theme that I've always been interested in exploring. But it's interesting now that I'm applying that to my own life. I have, over the past 15 years, done a lot of art in community work, you know, encouraging people to write about stuff from their past that they find difficult.
Because you have brought out a collection as well.
Yeah, I have brought out a collection, which is called Dressed as Love, and I'm very excited about it. And I think I did want to write that collection because I felt I had new things to say. I do feel like over the past few years, the things I'm interested in writing about, I've moved over from politics a bit, and I'm really interested in writing about the lives of women and girls, influenced by a lot of my own experiences. I now make sure that I write every day. I write at least a page every day, even if it's absolute nonsense, and it usually is absolute nonsense. But the process of writing is so important creatively, therapeutically. But I think the thing that it's important to give thought to is, what do you want to put out in the world? Because the experience of the Corbyn show taught me that the moment you put it out in the world, you lose control of it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I had to think about that. It's why it took me quite a long time to put this collection together and get it out, because I had to think a lot about which stories do you want out in the world.
Yeah.
And also when people are so predisposed to just argue online and find reasons to get upset. Like I've moved more into writing for young kids now because I just got tired of putting political messages up. It's really hard to say something about life and about humanity without having some political message in there. And I would find putting something up, I would just get tired of just people just going off on one who were getting really agitated by it. I always find it really funny that the same people who get upset by my messaging in poems for adults will pay money now to send their kids to see me for the same messaging for their kids. Because everyone agrees that like kids should fundamentally be in touch with their feelings. And it's okay for kids to care about helping each other and sharing things with each other and all these messages that somehow I feel like you put it out for adults. Yeah. And it's like you're just inviting everyone to a massive fight, right? Like it's weird.
Yes.
Would you be up for sharing a poem with us from the collection?
Absolutely. I'm going to read this poem, which was written as part of a project with Leicester Rape Crisis and an organisation called Slowways, who are building a nationwide map of walking routes between every town and city in the country. I wrote this after we took this group of teenage girls on a walk through the Derbyshire countryside. We arrive, a cavalcade of teenage girls, park outside the post office, buy 5 packets of ready salted in return for the key to the loo. Our group, a haze of eyelashes and pack-a-macs, pass by men with walking poles and waterproofs. We are not here for the miles, and I am ready for stragglers, but their bodies move them forwards, hands on tree trunks, legs crouched over something disgusting, squashed and skeletal. Do you reckon a bird dropped it? They are like tiny kids again. Buttercups under chins, dandelion seed heads, pink flowers pressed into the pages of notebooks. Is that corn, miss? Can we eat it? Are we going to see an eagle, woodpecker, pheasant? No one complains about the drizzle and the heat. Because out here, no one wants anything from them. No deadlines or pressure. They're not being weighed up and measured. It is not the run to the bus stop past the building site, 3 a.m. with keys between fingers, or the corridor of boys with their phones out. No long wait for a taxi that never comes. No grades, no marks, no scales, no mirrors. These girls with their secrets trying to keep it together, just big skies and trainer treads on grass and gravel, the promise of a cheese cob picnic. They just keep going. And at the end, as they lean against the minibus, mouths full of flapjack, the men come with walking poles and waterproofs, and one of our gang says, Have you been on the walk? Because we have too.
Beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much, Jess. Okay, so it's so great to have you here, Jess, and to reminisce about the great work you've produced and to hear a piece. But we'd be remiss if we weren't digging into what you're working on now, because it's so exciting. You've got a new TV show called Curfew that you've written an episode for that we can chat about, but you've also written for EastEnders and for other projects as well. We'd love to learn more about that. The idea of moving into a whole different medium, in my mind, that must be terrifying and a real challenge, but also really rewarding. How has it been?
I spent, how long? 10 years writing performance poetry and doing gigs and writing books, and I loved it. But I did have odd moments where I was like, oh, is this just what I do now? Am I not allowed to do anything else? I wrote a poetry collection, which was also a live poetry show, which was called Burning Books. And it was a series of poems about education under Tory government. And a lot of that was inspired from my poem, Dear Mr. Gove. And then at the time I was living in Leicester, and Curve Theatre in Leicester were very supportive of me and helped me to get some funding to turn that show into a play. And that was my first experience of writing a full-length play. And my goodness, it was a baptism of fire. I thought I knew what a play was, and you don't know what a play is until you're trying to write a 90-minute play. So I wrote that, and then I had this script, and it was that script which got me an agent. And so I had this agent for a bit.
So the script was of Burning Books?
Yeah, the script was of the play of Burning Books, which was all set in this school staff room that was facing academisation. It was the story of these characters in the school. And I had this agent. And I'll be really honest, I mean, he's never going to listen to this podcast. He mainly just represented opera singers. Who knows why he took me on. You know what? I'm sure he was a great agent to some people. It wasn't a very good agent for me. But what it did do was that it opened a lot of doors when you're applying for things where you need to have an agent. So I can tick the box that says, yes, I've got an agent. And so that allowed me to apply for the Writers' Academy. And from there, the Writers' Academy was an absolute baptism of fire. I didn't know what the 5-act structure was. I knew nothing about narrative structure. And everyone else, was from a real theatre background and really understood story structure. And it took me so long to get my head around that. And then, from then it was, I wrote for the soaps for a few years. I wrote for EastEnders, Holby and Casualty for a few years. And I think, writing for the soaps is really interesting because in the 90s, that was like, the golden age of like EastEnders. And I think the landscape of television has really, really changed. The soaps definitely still have their place. They tell really important stories. They still very much hold that place in the national conversation of like putting really difficult conversations directly into people's living rooms. And that's really important. But now we live in a world of Netflix and Amazon and all the streamers and everything and lots of choice. And I just decided that actually I wanted to slightly take my foot off the pedal of the soaps and see what else was available in the world of television. And that's sort of where I am now.
Was there a point, just before we go into that, like with the soaps, was there a point when you just got to write something you're like, that's really cool, I got to do that? Like, if I got to like put a punch into the Queen Vic somewhere, like someone landing a punch on someone in the Queen, I'm like, that's cool, that would be my punch.
Barry rolling down the hill. I wish I'd written Barry rolling down the hill.
But I mean, I loved writing for the soaps because I grew up obsessed with EastEnders and obsessed with Coronation Street, and I still love both of them as shows. And my real high point of writing for EastEnders was that I was a part of Janine's re-entry into the EastEnders Square, and like writing her kind of coming into the Vic and clashing with people and clashing with Sharon it's always going to be fun. It's always going to be fun. Yeah, absolutely. And putting words into the mouth of Danny Dyer is always it's really fun.
I've got a plan to do Danny Dyer the musical.
Oh, amazing!
We can make this happen.
I'm sure I'd be up for it.
There's a lot of swearing involved, so I won't say it on the podcast.
Amazing.
But you've moved away from soaps now.
Yeah. So the thing about soaps is that, they are an amazing training ground for writing for television. There is a sort of thinking that if you can write for soaps, you can write for anything, because your first thought has to be your best thought. You've got to turn this around in a week. We're going to start filming in 6 weeks. Yeah. It's so fast paced. And even when you think you're done and dusted and you've handed it in and that your job is done, you'll get a phone call from the script editor that's like, actually, Danny Dyer doesn't really want to say this line, so could you just come up with something else in this moment? So it's really fast paced. And that was kind of an amazing thing to be part of. And I think the thing about soaps is that they are quite time and energy consuming. So it's quite difficult if you're writing for the soaps to have your time and your energy to focus on your kind of real passion projects. So I did make this very conscious decision that was absolutely terrifying. I remember EastEnders coming and being like, do you want another episode? And I'd say, no, thanks. And it was terrifying because I took my foot out of that camp and I didn't have my other foot anywhere else. And my plan was to try and get some of my own projects into development, to make relationships with producers, to try and get on some shows that already existed and to write episodes. But I had 6 months where I did not earn a penny, where I had taken my foot out the poetry camp, I'd taken my foot out the soap camp, and I wasn't yet in the world of TV development. And I really thought that I had tanked my career. I mean, I just like to do all of the riskiest things at the same time. So at the same time, I also jumped ship from my agent, from my opera singer agent, and I found a new agent. But my goodness, you're going around all these agencies and I'm like there with my handful of credits and my BBC Writers Academy and my BBC Slam and, here's everything that makes me a good catch. And you're just getting rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. And I'm like, what have I done? And then just through word of mouth, somebody recommended this guy, and I was like, nope, I don't want a guy, I don't want a man, I need to have a woman agent because of the stuff that I write about. And then I met him and I was like, oh, actually, he's great and he's like a perfect fit. And so finding this really great agent who really kind of gets what I want to do has been a huge part of that journey. And
so now, your most recent project that's coming out, you've written an episode for a series called Curfew, which is a thriller. Yeah. Right? Do you want to tell us a bit about
absolutely.
It? Yeah, it comes out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, the date's not been announced yet, but it's coming out in the autumn.
Okay.
So it is a thriller. It's a whodunit set in a world where men aren't allowed out at night. And obviously, this idea of men not being allowed out at night is often talked about in relation to women's safety, but particularly, after the death of Sarah Everard, it was talked about quite genuinely in the Houses of Parliament, where women MPs stood up and they said, well, what do we do about the endemic of violence against women and girls? Do we lock men up at night? And so it's based on a book called After Dark, and all the men are tagged and they are not allowed out between the times of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. And if they do step out the houses, an alarm goes off and the women's safety team come and take them all down.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What a fantastic idea to explore.
Yeah. And it was brilliant. So it was my first experience, obviously outside the soaps, of writing on another show or doing a writer's room. So my agent came to me with the idea and the pilot script, and I read it, and then I got an interview for the writers' room. Oh my goodness, it was chaos, because I found out I had the interview. I mean, this is classic television. I found out sort of 36 hours in advance that I was going to do this interview. It was the same day that I was going to Shambhala. I ended up, and I was like, can we move it? And my agent was
the year
like,
that we...
Yeah, it was. And I said to my agent, can we move it? And he was like, no, absolutely. Jess, this is like your dream opportunity. We're not moving it. In the end, I ended up having to do it in the upstairs massage room of my friend's hairdressers. And I had got my T-shirt. I've got a T-shirt that says, make men scared. And I did this Zoom interview, and I was so just, excited and stressed, but I was like, I can't tell you how much this is like the project for me. This is just all of my interests all come together. Again, you know what? I got the job and I went into the writer's room and I felt like the least experienced person in that room. But I think just my sheer enthusiasm that you could not fake just, I think, came out of me in that interview. I was just so desperate to do that job. I just loved it.
Listening to you is really interesting because you talk a lot about enthusiasm, passion and confidence. It's really like driven you through all of this. Even when you talk about like, I feel like I'm the least experienced person in the room, and there's this like undercurrent of confidence and like inner kind of strengths. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm very interested in the idea of confidence as well. And, you know, I talk a lot about you put on your confidence coat. You know, confidence is an act. I'm always very interested in like teachers and the way that teachers are just like faking it all the time. They pretend they know things when they don't.
Yeah, it's all a performance really, isn't
it? It's all a performance. But I do think that, like, you know, if I'm not interested in something, I can't fake enthusiasm.
I just want to ask Jess, should we be locking men up at night?
I think it is an interesting question because, you know, one of the things that came up in the writer's room, you know, we spent 2 weeks talking about a world where men are locked up at night. And what would you do? What would you do if it was safe for you to go out at night? My goodness, you'd go running, you'd have picnics, you would, you know, I feel so much that my life is restrained by like the seasons. You know, I go to the gym in the summer and I will cycle back through the park, and I can't do that in the winter. And my husband doesn't think anything of it. My husband can go on a walking holiday on his own if he wants to, but I wouldn't feel that I could do that. But I think one of the questions that we talked about in the room is that if you lock up all the men at night, that is based on the assumption that women are most in danger from men who jump out at them in dark alleys. And we know that that is not true. What we know is that women are most in danger from the men that they share their homes and their beds with. And if you lock all the men up at night, you are locking women up with their abusers, which is exactly what happened during COVID in terms of we saw huge spikes of domestic violence. So this is why I'm so interested in the concept of the show, because it seems like a fun idea. Let's lock all the men up and throw away the key. But actually it taps into so many real issues about the endemic of violence against women and girls.
I need to watch this show.
Yeah.
I need to watch this show.
Yeah, and you talked a lot about we there, which segues really nicely into my question, because I wanted to know what the collaboration process is like a bit more. Is it smooth or is there lots of fights?
So I had heard horror stories about writers' rooms, and there are some well-known shows where the writers' rooms have been absolutely terrible because they've been toxic and competitive. And, you know, you hear stories of writers' rooms where 10 writers go in and on day one they're told, well, we're making 9 episodes. Whoever impresses us most during this time will get an episode, one of you won't. You know, it's hugely competitive and a lot of people in TV use that against writers. The writers' room that I did for Curfew was absolutely lovely. It was an all-female room. It was led by Lydia Yeoman. She was the showrunner. She was the lead writer. She's written most of the episodes. I have never seen somebody be so on it. You know, she came into that, but we had a 2-week room, which isn't that long. You know, in America, they go on for months and months. And she had the entire, you know, show up until, you know, that point all in her head. And she was just able to kind of facilitate conversations that really kind of filled the gaps and created stories. And I just thought she was a complete genius. So we spent, you know, time discussing this world and what would be the pros and cons of this world. And then we spent time, you know, mapping it all out on the wall and what are the various different stories, and also comparing it to the book. How much do we want to deviate from the book? Do we want to change who did it? Working on a whodunit and trying to second guess your audience is fascinating. You're coming up with the whodunit and trying to do misdirection and clues, and all the time I'm just thinking, I don't want to sit down on episode 1 with my husband and my husband say, I bet they did it, and for him to be right. And so it's fascinating. Yeah. It's a really exciting thing to be part of. And then you all go away and you write your episodes, and then, you know, it's a classic thing in television again that you leave the room thinking, great, I know exactly what I've got to do and I know exactly what the show is, and then you hand in your first draft and it completely changes. There's so much stuff which we absolutely loved which had to be thrown out and isn't in the show because there just wasn't space for it. And that's just the nature of it. And actually writing for Curfew was such a lovely experience. in terms of, I did my draft, I got my notes. I remember getting a phone call after a few drafts towards Christmas. I was on the bus and I got a phone call that was like, yeah, great, we love it, you're done. And I was like, I'm done? That's been the easiest and best writing experience of my life. So yeah, it's been great. Loved it.
I am that person
Yeah?
that guesses the whodunit on
Oh,
episode
no.
1, so I'll be
Oh, no.
watching.
I'm trying to think about who might have done it.
It's going to be on Paramount Plus.
Paramount Plus. Yeah.
Paramount Plus. So you keep an ear out for it. We'll put a link to the description to find out more about that show, but definitely check it out.
And we'll have another link about me and Charlie's
Discussion of who we think did
conspiracy
it.
theory, who we think has done it.
I think we'll have a chat about this movement from spoken word into this in a second, but maybe it's a good time to hear a poem from someone that's been sent in. This is a piece that a few of us heard a while back, actually, at an event. This is by Lizzy Denning, who's a fantastic poet based in Peterborough, and this poem is called First Night. It's about a very famous moment and looking at it a slightly different way.
First night. We know what the men were up to. Travelling, gifting. But what about Mary? Did she lie back on the hay and breathe in blood, sweat, animal scents? A hot wooden smell like the shed in summertime. Dried grass. Crispy spider webs. Or perhaps it rained as he was released from her body. Drops as fat as a baby's cheeks, as full as the milky moon. Did she cut the cord with a knife, wince when he latched? Did she experience a hunger so intense she feared for a moment she would eat him up? So delicious were his sticky eyelashes, his rounded bottom. I don't believe for a second she was able to lie him in a manger. She spent every moment of that first night holding on, consuming him, sinking their breath. In, we are so lucky. Out, you are the world. It's what we all do. We cannot help it. Even if a shepherd were to suggest, sleep when the baby sleeps. Did she worry that the swaddling was too tight, that Joseph wasn't supporting the head? Could she feel the pressures of the world outside that bolted door and will him back inside of her? Did she wipe his face and whisper to him that she would do better, we would be better? Did her body explode into stars at the sound of his cry?
Thank you so much to Lizzy Denning for that fantastic poem. Really felt like we all got to slow down time for a moment as we listened to that. I think it was beautifully written.
Yeah, it was
Find it.
beautiful. Some of her language and her imagery, really evocative and really soothing.
It also fits the conversation we were just having with Jess about writing someone else's story or a pre-given story, but then still creating something new from it and a new feeling, and that was really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll put a link in the episode description so you can find more of Lizzy's work. You definitely should. For now, your journey into writing for TV is really inspiring and exciting. And there's been a lot of uncertainty, it sounds like, through that journey. And I imagine for a lot of people who write poetry and maybe even perform poetry, if they're interested in moving into this area, what advice would you have?
I think it all comes down to having a really good spec script. So having a script which really kind of encapsulates you as a writer, the things that you're interested in writing about. My spec script, when I first started out and was applying for stuff, was a story from the point of view of a 15-year-old girl who is unaware that she is being groomed by her teacher. She's quite a fun character. It's quite sparky. It's very energetic. It's very lively. She's quite a fun character that you want to spend time with. And I think that really encapsulates the things that I'm interested in writing about in terms of abuses of power. I'm always very interested in telling those stories which look at what victimhood means and looking at that from a different perspective.
And so, sorry, did you write that before you got an agent or anything? You just did that yourself?
Yeah, I wrote that at the time that I had my opera singer agent. So my agent who only repped opera singers. Before I was applying for BBC Writers Academy or anything, I was using that script to apply to stuff. before you think about applying for anything, it's really important to get a really strong spec script.
How long is that? Is it full length?
I think a lot of the screenwriting opportunities ask for, it needs to be longer than 40 pages, 45 pages. A good rule of thumb is to have an hour, just to show that you can write for an hour. But I think there would be nothing wrong, writing a half-hour comedy. I think it's a good idea to think about like what suits the thing that you're writing. So my spec script about the teenage girl is very much like it's a drama, so it's like a BBC hour. It's 60 minutes. You might be writing something that you think is more appropriate for Channel 4, so you might write something which is about 50 minutes. So it's broken into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections with 3 ad breaks. So yeah, thinking about who your script is appropriate for, what channel it would be appropriate for, and deciding the length based on that.
Did you read many scripts prior to writing yours, or how much research did you do? Because I'm just wondering, if I wanted to start this, even what you're talking about now, I don't know about anyone else, it feels like a big thing to undertake.
Yeah.
So did you find scripts that you really liked in advance to see how they were laid out? Like what works?
Pretty much every script that has been on screen is available to read online somewhere.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So so I'm at the moment working on a YA adaptation. It's a book adaptation into a film, and it's the first time that I've written a film. So I'm now reading loads of film scripts, and I'm just reading film scripts of films that I really love. So I'm working my way back through Greta Gerwig's back catalogue, and you just Google like Lady Bird film script and it will just come up. If you go on BBC Writers' Room, they have a whole bank of scripts on there. Most things are on the BBC at the moment. They have their scripts on the BBC Writers' Room. If you were going to apply for the Channel 4 writing course, which is a really high quality one, most people who go through the Channel 4 writing course end up having something brilliant on television. That is run by Philip Shelley. And if you Google Philip Shelley and find his website, he has a whole bank of scripts. Some that have been on telly, some written by just writers that he's worked with, some that were used in the application process to get onto the Channel 4 writing course. Reading scripts is really important, just to get an idea of what needs to go on the page, how much needs to go on the page, how you should set it up. And I think you want to get yourself to a point where you have read so many scripts, that stuff is then kind of embedded in you, and then you can throw it away and think, okay, but how am I going to do it? Because the worst thing to do is to think, okay, well, I'm going to write just how Phoebe Waller-Bridge writes. I'm going to write a version of a sex education script. That you don't want to just be emulating what someone else is doing, particularly because, TV is an industry which looks for authenticity, for individual voices. The way that I write my scripts is that they're very visual. I know that there's a lot of poetry in my scene directions, but other people rely much more on dialogue, particularly people that come from a real kind of theatre-based background. It's all about kind of dialogue. And I think it's really important to remember that, like, particularly if you're applying for a writer's room opportunity, you are going to be applying with, say, every screenwriter in the country who wants that opportunity. So it's going to be thousands of people. I have been a reader for the BBC. So I have been reading scripts from people applying for those competitions. And sometimes you are reading the first 10 pages of 50 scripts a day. And if it is Friday afternoon, you've been doing it for 2 weeks, you're on your last day, you just want to sit down and have dinner, and you're reading your final script, that's the person you need to be writing for. You need to engage somebody who is on their final day of reading the first 10 minutes of 50 scripts a day, and they are exhausted and they just want to go and have their dinner. And if you can grip them, then you've got a really brilliant script.
Don't leave your twists and your best stuff further down the line, because they might not even get to what...
Absolutely. So in terms of the process for these entry-level opportunities, as a reader, reading lots of these scripts, you go through the first phase, which is where you read 10 minutes of everybody's script, and you're given a checklist for what is characterization like. Do they have a basic understanding of narrative structure? Can you see that it is leading to an inciting incident? What is the dialogue like? Is it gripping? Is it interesting? Those are all I can remember. And then you literally tick a box, yes or no, should this go through to the next stage? And the key question at the end of that form is, would you read on? Would you read on, yes or no? And then it goes through to the stage where they read 20 pages, and then it goes through to the stage where they read the full script. The key trick is you want to set up a question in your first 10 minutes that you don't answer until the end. And that's the way to get all the way through, because the person who is reading it, they want to find out what's happened.
So it's a bit like a poetry set, because what you do, is you have one of your stonkers at the beginning, don't you?
Yeah.
To make sure you stop
Yeah.
the guy near the toilet chatting, and you grab people in, and then you do your kind of stonker at the end.
Yeah, it absolutely is like a poetry set. Yes, that's something I often think, that it's really like a poetry slam. You have to imagine that when you are writing your script, you're in an incredibly busy pub and nobody wants to listen to you, and you need to turn every single head in there and make them listen.
So that's a really good transferable skill.
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is there any advice you've got about how to kind of maintain your confidence whilst working on it? Because you're at the point now where you've got evidence that you can draw upon when you're working on something. I've managed to do this. It's got commissioned. I've got, I've done these things. But I feel sometimes someone starting out, I guess you have to be prepared for rejection.
I mean, I think I would say I thought I knew what rejection was. And then I started working in television, and rejection became redefined. I mean, it honestly is like 99.9% of working in TV is rejection. I mean, probably not for James Graham and Russell T Davies, but it is for me. And that's just, but we as poets, as people working in the arts, we already have experience of rejection. And, sometimes I talk to TV producers about, being in a slam, you perform your poem and then people literally hold up numbers and score you. They give your art a score and they think that's horrendously brutal. And it is. But, as poets, we are not strangers to rejection. I suppose the difficult thing is that perhaps if you're writing a 60-minute script, that's going to take a lot of your time and a lot of your effort and your energy. And it's often stuff that's incredibly personal to you. It's not a 90-second poem. It's a hefty 60-minute script. And it is a little piece of perhaps the worst things that have ever happened to you, and you've put it into an artistic form, and then you send it off to people and they go, nope, I don't like it. And that is difficult. Things that have helped me are, there is that classic exercise, which I've heard mentioned on this podcast, which is where you give yourself a goal. I'm going to try and get 20 rejections this month. And then rejections don't necessarily give you such a sting. When I was working on spec scripts, I would ask trusted friends, and that is not friends that you just want to give you a big thumbs up and pat you on the back. That is genuinely people who know what they're talking about and can give you creative feedback. I have also paid a script editor. There are lots and lots and lots of freelance script editors out there to give me notes on scripts as well, so that I can understand, well, why is this getting rejected? Why does this not work? A lot of opportunities as well will offer feedback on scripts if you get a rejection. And I would say once the sting has worn off, absolutely take that feedback on board. It is so easy to be like, well, you just don't understand it. Take that feedback on board, because those people know what they're talking about and they understand the industry. And I think just remember that, like, it's a tough industry, but you have something to say, you have a story to tell, you've done your research, and you have a burning desire to write for television or film, and just keep at it. Is probably the best thing I can say.
And you're still enjoying writing poetry is there time for it?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I guess the nice place I'm in now is that, there have been times when I was working as a poet where I felt like, oh my goodness, I've got to keep writing poems because I've got to keep creating content for online or for this commission, and it's going to pay my bills. And now I'm in quite a nice position where I can write poetry because I want to write poetry, and I can start from a place of I want to write a poem, and then afterwards I can decide whether that's for public consumption or not, and that's quite a nice place to be in.
That's cool.
I like that.
If you've been listening to this, hopefully you'll be as appreciative as we are that Jess has come in and shared so much with us.
Can I give one more little tip that I think might be useful?
Yes.
Which I think is just like, how do you literally access the industry?
Yeah.
Because I think that's such a barrier for people. And I would say the points of access to the industry are applying to those writer schemes. So BBC, Sky, Channel 4 are the main ones. I think Netflix does do something as well. Beyond those, it's really hard to access the industry if you don't have an agent. So be following, the big agencies like Casarotto, United Agents, Berlin. There are others that are now escape my brain. Look up who your favourite writers are and look who they're represented by, and then follow those agencies online, follow the agents who work for those agencies. There are some brilliant agents out there who will, every so often they'll say, okay, I'm opening my inbox today. If you've got a script and you want to send it to me, please do. It's a whole different kettle of fish to be sending your scripts unsolicited to an agent, but certainly there are opportunities to make contact with agents. Also be following production companies. So look up what production companies are making your favourite shows, because quite often the production companies and producers will say, okay, we're now looking for something in this genre and you might have something. I would say those are the key points for accessing the industry.
That's so much useful information. Jess, thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us. Should we give Jess a massive round of applause? I think.
Danny Dyer.
So yeah, we've been We the Poets. So lucky today. We've got Keely Mills, Charley Genever joining me, Mark Grist in the studio, and we've got Jess Green as our special guest, who has shared so many fantastic tips and experiences with us. We've got Chris Barn in the studio, who is oh look, he's happy. He's having a nice time. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of WAV files through, not MP3s, so he's really, really happy about that.
No,
Thank you so much to Sarah Waits and to Lizzy Denning for sending in those fantastic poems that we've got to listen to. And thanks Arts Council England for providing us with public funding for the series. And finally, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. I don't know about you guys, I feel like this has been so amazing. From when we first met in our episode 0 and we talked about what we hoped to get. We talked about that we were hoping for some inspiration, and it's just been so inspiring to this month after month,
100%. Can I also say that if anyone watches this film, I'm really sorry, I forgot I was being filmed. So I might have done stuff that might not look good on film. Sorry to demean everything you just said, but I just want to get it out.
Bringing back the OnlyFans.
The Riz.